Actually, Nishapa, do you have any? I haven't asked about online audience. Do they have any question? Sorry, that's been yeah. It's okay. Good. Okay, but no question from the online. Okay, fine. Don't worry. Great. So we had, I would say, quite various theme on the last panel, from material to some some of like early work on material and facade to daylight and simulation to integrating with context. For me, it's kind of like drawing the theme, and you look at what happened today. You probably each of you will actually address some of either comfort or simulation, or we had as well energy demand. So some of you used thermal comfort as well, Fergus, kind of like a key cornerstone really of like the theory around thermal comfort. And you used mainly kind of like fixed figure, like upper boundary. I'm just thinking even in Saudi when you're putting like 29, and I have been there. I don't know how people will be. I usually, if I go there, I have to layer up when I go into the building because it's so cold. So it's like as well the social etiquette. So I'm just wondering about integrating more adaptive measure and maybe have this kind of pushing the boundary on that. So this first question I wanted more on this thermal comfort and then more on material science. So any suggestion or any?
So I would say that I consider actually thermal comfort. I did the calculation for the adaptive thermal comfort, but my focus was on the energy efficiency. But absolutely, for future work, like another publication, I could consider that as like the limitation of the boundaries and so on. So it could be another published paper for only thermal comfort. The expand, yeah, I did also the air velocity calculation that could be like more, yeah, more kind of less or above than the comfort limit. If people can adapt more comfort limit, that's what we are gonna achieve, and if less, that's what we're gonna achieve. But I didn't actually consider that here in this paper. But yeah, my focus was only in energy efficiency more than the chem. But both of them are basically correlate to each other. So yeah.
I pretty much agree. I think it's pretty much easier here than it is in Saudi because I've also written a paper in Saudi about Saudi, very similar. So it's very over here. You have strict guidelines with CVSE, and it's easier to figure out. But over there, especially where it's very mechanically cooling dominant, it's very difficult to fix what would be a standard like adaptive cooling comfort temperature air criteria. So I think yeah, that could be a body of research on its own. So yeah.
I would like to add something quickly. So we just like the regulation, the Saudi Building Code, basically just emerged in 2018. So they actually considered like AC system to be at 25 Celsius. So maybe we could consider the adaptive comfort, and we could recommend that in the regulation in the future, maybe. Yeah, basically we didn't have regulation, like we didn't have a building code in the past, like literally people were just building with like just typical building with bricks and so on, but now it's changing and I'm so happy for this.
U values have just been like launched, like as in like they've just started recommending actual U values. So it's very new.
So it's the UK is a little different from the climatic conditions in Saudi. So what we did is since ours was an educational building, the temperature range was very minimal. So we went for a broader range from 20 to 25, and then we did the assessment, which is over and above that.
so much. No. Yeah. No, thank you very much. I would say it's quite interesting to see as well the future and what it holds and what people expect to be in the building compared to if the code is pushing for more adaptation. It's really, yeah. But you have to think of we are creature of habit. Are we not going to ask and complain and say, oh, I want the set point to be at so much? And the same, like this kind of like going. My question and is more on materials and materiality. And when we talk about, creature of habit and how do you, shifting you had like loads of points and it was quite interesting to see your top three kind of, yes, for each of the different part. But how do you talk about the council and how there's that fantastic initiative that they have. But how do you think you're going to push a boundary? Is it going through, for example, on comfort, going with a stick, i.e. through regulation, or is it kind of like a softer approach? Maybe.
I think from my research, that was a big chunk of what I was looking at. They did answer like what are the core suggestions how to push reuse to be more readily used in the industry, and the top one was definitely legislative requirements. But throughout the past studies I've looked through in my literature review, that was the top suggestion for all of them. But everybody's that's not actually the top barrier. So that was quite interesting to see in my study. So maybe all the stakeholders just pushing the responsibility onto governmental bodies, or I don't know if saying this is a bit controversial, but I think a lot of people in my interviews did strive saying that just don't wait for any research, don't wait for case study, don't wait for all the codes to come out. Just start researching and build your own route to how to use these building components. And even the steel reuse stockist managing director, he was like, they did not know how to assess a structural integrity of the steel when it's reclaimed, but they managed to go to test centers and then try and find any material history, material passports on the materials, and then hopefully they take on the responsibilities from their experience to ensure these reclaimed products, so it's less worries for other stakeholders. So they're a big they're a big business in initiating this, but I think there just need to be more action and people need to stop being scared with the psychological barriers and try to bridge the gap between collaborations. Yeah. Thank you.
Any question from the audience? Lily? I will just carry on asking questions. Sorry, it's quite an indulgence to be able to ask a lot of questions. On kind of like this circularity, so very on Russia, the last presentation, so linking to kind of recycling, reusing material to recycling, reusing kind of spaces that we have in cities. Again, so you mentioned collaboration, case study, and maybe regulation, and you have maybe, say 20% of the building material need to be reused. That's it, from tomorrow, and have like maybe a roadway, a pathway, like saying 5% by 2025 and et cetera, and going. But do you think that maybe as well, in terms of reusing space, you mentioned about maybe barrier between terms of stakeholder or who own or use the space, and even if from a stakeholder engagement, it seems that they're very engaged. They want the space to change and use for them. You have spaces like Debenhams closed for years, and the local people just think, well, community space, of another space. So how do you think about, again, this notion of reusing space within city? Do you think it should have some form of like regulatory framework or some form of
I think yes, it should be introduced in all the cities as it's vital to create a community. So doing this framework and making it official would really, really benefit the community and the city itself.
Ask something in generic, in a more broad range. Would you tackle to go to the government to ask for change, or would you go from a bottom approach to the communities, or would you approach the local authorities to say change the local codes, because quite often they may be more related to the site? So what would be your first approach to try to make a change?
I think with this topic that I was investigating in, like reuse, I think it's pretty much impossible to voice it directly to the top. Obviously, there are a lot of like European waste initiatives, and they have these organizations, but these organizations are quite helpful with like giving grants out to small businesses on this matter of like circular economy. But I would say with the Enfield project as well, and also Council for Brighton Council, they're really good at just starting around the area, and also Scotland's getting really good at they have some guidance on circular economy as well. So I think it would be great to have like little communities to start with the broad sense of like circular economy. Maybe it's easier with like coffee ground or fashion, but with building industry, I feel like at least a local council level of initiation is important, because I feel like individuals don't really need reclaimed timber in their day-to-day use. Thank you.
Hello. I actually worked with Daylight and actually comfort for the elderly people. And one of the interesting thing is background study shows that when you ask them that is the light efficient in your room, if the light is not efficient, they always answer, because of their habituation of the space, they always answer it's all right. But when you try to measure it actually, then you can see actually it's not enough for in the houses. And one of the interesting thing is, if you just search in one of the care homes, it takes almost 850 pounds per week to live in a care home per week. So it's really expensive. And if not from the government perspective, if it is from the client perspective that they need it for better visualizing the internal spaces, I believe it should be started from them, and then it should be asked. And if it is 850 pounds, then they would add anything to make them comfortable. I believe so. It should be started from the bottom up.
I will also say like it's better to go from the bottom, like try to like get the people's mind changed. But the thing is, the amount of people that they will accept this, or there will be some resistance. So I think I think it's better to have like start from the local council, because people tend to follow rules. So when there is some kind of rules, they tend to see it. Okay, what's the reason behind the rules? So maybe they will start to follow and maybe start to talk about those things instead of starting from the
I think I would say the same thing, start from the bottom, but then also include local authorities even at the start. Or maybe just show them that there is need for a change. I think that's it.
I think one of the problems with dealing with old houses is that they were designed with a completely different heating system. They were designed with a open fire, and what you did was you got closer to the fire or further away if you were too hot, and so on. With the result that they have very often very little control over the amount of air coming into the building. You know, the windows by modern standards don't fit at all well, which seems to us very strange, but actually at the time they were built, the temperature of the air wasn't really so important. It was the temperature, it was the heat from the fire, you know, the radiant heat and so on. And that's one of the difficulties, is that the local council will then come along to you and say, you've got to do it to a certain modern standard. You know, you've got to tighten all the windows and all that sort of stuff. And that's really quite difficult to do without, while remaining within the bounds of any local policy, you know, of preserving the I mean, I live in a house which is in an area which is quite a large area, which is preserved because it's a very typical Edwardian area, you know, of row houses and so on. And you know, you're continually worrying about whether you should get permission for doing something which, you know, and so on. I mean, everybody knows that if you do it at the back of the house, it doesn't make much difference. But if it's a really important building, it will make a difference. And I think that's one of the things that's quite difficult. I mean, we were asked by the was it the Scottish building, you know, what is it called? Scottish, yeah. Anyway, it's the Scottish people who preserve, like the National Trust, you know, they preserve building, and they came to us and we said, well, it's really quite difficult, you know, we had to think about it, and you're going to have a group of people coming into the house who will expect a certain level of comfort and so on, and yet you don't want to change, you know, even making the single glazing into double glazing changes the way it looks. So I think it's a problem we have in this country, particularly because we've got a lot of areas of fairly old buildings, you know, which are used for housing. Yeah.
It's a preservation against the new, but then it's, you know, following the first presentation that we have with a complete new technology, and how do you integrate that into, you know, so I suppose it's not even a retrofit option. It's a completely new, completely new, and it's just going to be like pushing to our like new boundaries. So yeah, you mentioned it like it's a community project at scale. Do you need to like?
So that's the reason I did the 3 scenarios, right? So that's the reason I chose the community plan, so that like we start from the very scratch, so that like the incorporation becomes much more easier into the same build. Even my recommendation recommends from design engineers to civil engineers that from now point onwards, you also incorporate some new renewables, which might not be feasible at this point, but would be feasible in future, so that you make it much more flexible, that even in future something happens, you can be integration would be much more easier and simpler in that particular sense. And then, yeah, that retrofit is not possible at this point. That's the reason I also did the contrasting of Europe versus India versus UK at the same point, like seeing this particular novel technology, which is completely not feasible in one part of the world, is when compared it to some random different place, is completely feasible. Like just from, so for me, there was only 3 ways you could have possible cash coming in. Like you could generate some money. First was generation, electricity generation, and then other 2 was like 2 different kinds of tax savings. That's it. That's the only cash intake which you could possibly have. But when you compare with India, you don't have any tax savings because you don't have enough. There is a lack of policy. Just from standalone generation point, you can generate enough to completely make the whole system viable, and then it's profitable at the same time. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good conclusion of the session. That's it. So thank you everyone for attending. So the next, yes. So the next phase, we've got the last thing to do is we've got post-it note somewhere. I'm looking for like a yellow bunch of post-it note, and we've got a little box over there. You might have already done this. We encourage you to vote. The program is online, so you can vote for the presentation that you think, not yourself, please, someone else. And yes, and then in about 10 minutes, if you can do that, we're going to count the vote. So please have a tea, coffee, and then we're going to announce winner and accommodation for the day, and then close the conference. Thank you very much.